All right, continuing on in part 2 of Feminism, which is Feminism, Satan's Plan to Destroy Your Family. We got to talking about last week, it was just the introduction, giving all the quotations, the wicked, evil quotations from feminists, and explaining what feminism is. And I think it would be a good idea for me to repeat that feminism is an outcry of privileged women who don't want to suffer consequences for their choices. I'm not saying it's an outcry of all women. I'm saying that it's feminism specifically, okay? And I gave the example of how, they have that e-card and bumper sticker that says a woman's faults are many, but men have only two, everything they say and everything they do. Well, I'll give you an example of that in a second, but I just want to make sure everybody knows that if you want to follow along, you can type in the word feminism, Feminism, into the search bar at creationliberty.com, and you can find that article, Feminism, Satan's Plan to Destroy Your Family. I call it an article. It's really a book that you can read for free. If you're listening by YouTube, you can also click on the link in the description, and that should take you, roughly to where we are. You may have to scroll down and find it. But that thing where it says, a woman's faults are many, but men have only two, everything they say and everything they do. Let me explain that there's a lot of people that will read that and roll their eyes and just move on. But it's amazing how programmed we are to just accept such a thing. Because if I change the sexism to racism, we can understand this a lot better. Let me change some words in here, and let's give an example. If I say that a white man's faults are many, but black men have only two, everything they say and everything they do, people will be like, oh, how dare you say such a thing? They would be totally offended, wouldn't they? Right. Why is it suddenly change when it's sexism? Why is it that racism is so abhorrent to everyone? If you would dare write anything like that, you would be burned at the stake. You'd be burned alive for it by these people. But when it comes to attacking men, well, who cares, right? That's the attitude. So I ended last week talking about how there's a lot of these single women and these feminists who are they've never been around a good man. Some of it was their fault, some of it's not their fault, but for most of them, it is their fault. I'm not saying that every single mother home, it's their fault. There are bad men who have left their families, okay? I get that. And I've personally seen the examples of it. However, in most instances, today, maybe not a long time ago, but today, in most instances, single mother homes, statistically, have chosen to be single. And that's something we need to really understand to really get what's happening here, okay? Now, there were some testimonies I said I was going to go over starting this week, and I want to read through some of these. Now, I'm going to change some of the words in here or try to talk through some of it because I've had to censor out some of the language because these are just basic testimonies from young men who have grown up in a single mother home where their mother was a feminist. And I want you to get a full idea of what it's like to really grow up in a feminist home. And like I said, there's thousands of these testimonies you could find. I just chose a few because I wanted to give the examples, okay? So these are I took directly from Reddit. These are men's testimonies. The first one says, quote, "Some of the things I heard from my mother growing up, most men are evil. They cause all of the wars in the world. I want you to be one of the very rare good men. I want you to grow up to be more like a woman, someone who cares about other people." Now, before I continue, you remember what I was talking about last week, where they presume that all women are loving automatically. It's simply not true. As we can see, like I said, case in point, feminism. But he continues to say, "She told me that my father was abusive and used to beat her every day. And if I misbehaved," which in parentheses he put, "had my own opinion." That's what that means. Misbehaving means I had my own opinion. He said I was being abusive and was acting like him. So here now his mother was calling abusive. If he had an opinion that differed from hers, she labeled that as abusive. Welcome to feminism. "His name became a swear word in my house. Got me heavily involved in acting," I'm just quoting straight from here, but he was saying that his mother, got me heavily involved in acting, which I did like, and forced me to take jazz and ballet classes, which I hated. Screamed at me for hours when I didn't get parts, took me out of school and homeschooled me anytime I began to seem too independent or made a large group of friends. Now, a feminist being the head of a household would be the only, or not, probably not only, but one of the rare instances I would say you should not homeschool. That was probably one of the few very rare instances I would say public school would be better for you. But anytime he became too independent or made a large group of friends, constantly talked about how poor we were, like a badge of honor, still managed to find money for a boob job. That's interesting. He continues to say, I found out later that we had always been solid middle class, and all of the guilt I felt for having anything at all was misplaced, tried to talk to me about sexual things like who she thought was hot, tried to have me read erotic literature she wrote. When I told her to stop talking like that, she says, what's the problem? Is it because your mom is so hot? She told me she wanted a brother-sister relationship with me now that I was a teenager, end quote. That's just weird. That is just really, really, I don't really know how to describe it. I don't know how the words for it. That is odd and a little scary, okay? But if you actually went back and read this, I only put part of his testimony on there. If you go back and read the entire testimony, he goes on to describe how his sister was raised to be a vicious, hateful feminist, and how one time during a get-together they had with his mother and her friends, his sister said that she would cut off his male member, and everybody laughed. She received absolutely no punishment for what she said. He decided to reply in kind, just like a young child would do, to threaten to cut off her female member, and then he got in a lot of trouble for saying it because his mother's hatred for all things male had reached a level so deep she was willing to sacrifice the well-being of her son just to justify herself. Well, remember all that equality that was being talked about at the beginning? We talked about, like feminist.com and things like, we want equality between men and women. Where was the equality? See, there is no equality there. Feminism is not about equality, folks. They only say that it is on the TV. But if you actually look at what they're saying and doing, there's absolutely no equality. They want to destroy and kill off men. Here's another man who gave his testimony. He said, quote, my mother left my father when I was 10 and came out as a lesbian. She took my brother, who was an infant in diapers at the time, and me to a new city. We lived with Auntie Sue for a while, who I just assumed was a long-lost relative. Fast forward 25 years, and my brother and I are grown up and married, and we're both strongly anti-feminist. Our mother is still a man-hater, but she's way more mellow nowadays. Auntie Susie is long gone after beating my mother to a pulp a few times while drunk. A long string of aunties came and went as we grew up, end quote. Well, there's something interesting that we don't ever hear about on television and Hollywood and movies and all that, and all the music and everything that's being put out. We don't hear about the lesbians and the gays actually being in abusive relationships. Right? Because the impression that you get from all the homosexuals, all these sodomites out there, is that everything's just fine and lovey-dovey between us, and that we just have the best relationships ever. Statistically, it has already been shown. Now, I don't have all the stuff about it on this one. I'll probably have to do a completely different article on that subject. Okay, but the statistics have already shown that, number one, children do better with a mother and father figure in the home. Period. These are statistical, scientific inquiries that have been made and studies that have been done. And number two, that statistically there is a lot of high amount of violence within homosexual relationships. So these kind of things happen very often, which, you see, the gays out there, they don't want you to know about that stuff because then it'll prove the Bible's true in Romans chapter 1, which we read last week. So that's a whole nother topic. But this is the kind of thing they're putting up with. This is the kind of thing that the children are having to suffer through at the hands of the philosophy of these feminists. Now the woman, he's talking about his mother, right? This woman, she chose to leave her husband. It was not out of abuse. And the problem, I mean, so many people have watched TV, that's the impression they get about feminists. Okay? They don't actually get to, for the most part, look up what's really going on about them, about feminists, about lesbians, and people like that. They just look at TV and they listen to whatever TV tells them about it. And the TV always portrays the abused wife, the abused mother, or the abused girlfriend, right? And granted, those things happen. I'm not saying they don't. But the vicious, sinful feminist, which is so common, is not portrayed in the mainstream media. It's not portrayed in television shows and movies like that. And that's because most producers understand full well that most audiences don't find whining, selfish feminists very entertaining. That's why you're not going to find it on there. They can't sell it. Because they're not trying to sell you the truth, they're trying to sell you a lie. That's why the Bible tells us that in the end times people are going to turn their ears away from the truth and be turned into fables. That's why you can get millions and millions of people to go watch a television show, but I can barely get maybe 100 people to listen to something like this, right? And so, and people say, well, you get more views than that in your videos, don't you? I get views. A view counts up when somebody opens it and closes it. All right, that doesn't mean they actually listen to it. Very few people are actually listening to this stuff, sadly. And there's really no way. I mean, folks, when you're actually trying to teach the truth, you can't get very many people to listen to it because they don't want to. Most people would rather live in the fables they have created for themselves, and that the mainstream media and our government and the ruling elite have created for them. They would rather live in that world than actually understand the truth, because the truth can make you feel bad. Well, see, feeling bad, that's called grief. That's called affliction. And the Bible says that we ought to rather suffer affliction with the children of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. So here's another one, another testimony. He said, quote, "Sorry this is long. My mother abandoned our family, leaving me, my father, and my sister." So there again, another woman, another feminist, who chose to be single. And once we get onto the subject of divorce filings, you will see why. You will see the actual statistics that prove what I'm saying here. All this stuff that I'm talking about, we're going to demonstrate statistically. I will show you, step by step, all these different issues, okay? He says, 2 years later, after several failed drug tests, my mother informed both me and my sister that feminism freed her from my father and was going to help her win us in court so that she could further, I guess it's, screw this guy over. That's all I'm going to say, okay? You can fill in the blanks there if you want. Insofar as I can tell up to this point, my father really didn't do anything wrong to her. Even speaking to her family members, she's the one that just freaked out and left. So even her family says that there's something seriously wrong with her. She just left on her own. He continues to say she is now doing this to the father of a new child and has tried to tell me that it's, quoting her, he says, "It's my debt to her as a man to take the kid. I'm a part of the problem. I'm a part of the patriarchy." So now she wants to take her sinful burdens and put them onto her children. Welcome to feminism. He says, "I don't speak to her anymore honestly. It took her, while working in healthcare as a nurse, to be found as unsuitable as a mother while watching 2 children who died under her care. Though it was proven not to be her fault, as a nurse she could have prevented it. I slowly began to see feminism as an enemy for 3 reasons. So number 1, this type of woman who does these things is a nurse taking care of people in a hospital. Just think about that for a while. But here are his 3 reasons. Number 1, she used the words "I'm a feminist" to rally every feminist organization for women in my area to her side, getting pro bono lawyers. Now pro bono means it's a no expense lawyer. She gets it for free. and lots of people on school boards to her side, she got me labeled as mentally deficient and put in slow classes until I was about 14, to the irony of my ninth grade teacher saying that I was clearly a genius. Also, I'm currently going into math and physics, though I don't think I'm a genius. So because of her position of feminism and that men are deficient, she puts her own son into these slow classes, but he's actually going into a major in math and physics. How interesting. Number 2, at no point did any of these organizations even question her. That just believe women junk was around back then. They didn't believe she was a drug addict or really anything at all. It was the patriarchy trying to screw her over. They made a persistent slew of allegations against my father, none of which ever held up in court. So she lied, and tried to lie in court. Why are these women not being prosecuted for perjury? We'll get to that later. Number 3, the feminist organizations actively told her not to pay child support and to do whatever it took to get me and my sister back. While at her house once, some of them came over and told me how I deserved to die because I was a boy. I honestly expect an apology from anyone calling themselves a feminist. This wasn't a few people helping my mother, but huge organizations. At this point, feminism just disgusts me, namely their inability to stop using logical fallacies and psychological fallacies." End quote. That was just 3. There are many, many, many of these out there from young men who are talking about here is what it's like to grow up in a feminist home. Don't think it's peaches and cream like the feminists keep telling you. And because of these types of issues, because of this kind of abuse that's going on from feminism, there have slowly, recently started to spring up some forums and groups for men to discuss the lives that have been destroyed by the harassment and threats of feminists. But feminists are working their hardest to stop these meetings, and they keep going around chanting, "It's hate speech." Well, okay, just as a quick note, what is hate speech? I mean, really, you hear the term all the time, but think about it. What is it? Now, you see, the mainstream media, they never clearly define what that term means. And even if they did, it wouldn't make much sense. It's not going to have, it's because they'll say, well, it's any speech that's hateful. Well, thank you, because we can get that from hate speech. You use the word hate and the word speech to define what hate speech means. That's exactly what they do. And so it's begging the question. Logical fallacy, right? So even though we don't have a clear definition, let's pose a question to get some understanding of what's behind it. Is hate speech guaranteed in the First Amendment? Now, the First Amendment of the United States Constitution guarantees the freedom of speech, the right to speak freely, okay? For those of you outside this country, if you don't know that, that's what it is. So is hate speech guaranteed in the First Amendment? Well, you see, that's, for anybody who's actually studied the U.S. Constitution and constitutional rights, that's actually kind of an odd question. Now, of course, feminists would say hate speech is not guaranteed in the First Amendment. Right? Because, well, and then you're like, well, what is hate speech? That's my point, okay? But remember, these women are extremists, and they make extreme claims. So if you really want to understand what they're talking about, let's go to the other extreme. Let's ask the question, is love speech guaranteed in the First Amendment? Because after all, they claim that hate and love are opposites, right? So is love speech guaranteed in the First Amendment? Oh, okay. So now we're taking preferential treatment of one speech over another, aren't we? Yeah. See, all these questions I'm giving you, they're really just rhetoric. Rhetoric means it's exaggeration that's designed to influence you, and that's exactly what hate speech is. It's rhetoric. It's exaggeration designed to influence you. It's influencing you. The term hate speech is a peer pressure influence designed to shut you up. The fact of the matter is that the First Amendment has the term speech listed out without any adjectives in front of it. There is no hate speech, there's no love speech, there's no middle ground speech, there's no lukewarm speech. It doesn't say that. It says speech. And that is applied to anything that would make someone feel bad or make someone feel that their life choices are wrong. Like their life choice to be a homosexual, right? If you dare make anybody feel bad about that by saying the Word of God condemns this as sin and you will go to hell because of these things, okay, well, hate speech, and they will cry it out and they'll scream it out. And remember what I've told people before, that I believe that the number one thing, the main thing that young children should learn about government, again, is that, I've mentioned this before in past teachings, but it's that the squeaky wheel gets the grease. That's the number one thing that you should know about government, and it's the number one thing I think that you should understand when learning how government works. Because the squeaky wheel gets the grease means it's like when you're in a hamster wheel and you're running and it squeaks, and there's like a rust part of it. It squeaks, and as the hamster runs it goes, wee, 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 and it gets really annoying to where you have to spray it down with some oil in order to get it to shut up, okay? And that's what the government is doing. They're giving these people what they want to shut them up. So they will whine hate speech, which is like a squeaky wheel, and that's the one that gets the grease, okay? So the problem with all this is that the minority voice is the one that needs to be protected. The minority voice is usually the one that people find most offensive, because remember how I talked about how I can't get people to hardly listen to these teachings and what I do? Because when you talk about the truth, see, that is the voice. It's these kind of teachings that I'm doing on here and putting on these audio, that is the voice that the First Amendment is designed to protect. Because I would be one of the first ones to be kicked out if that goes away. And so would many of you who are listening, because I know the ones that are dedicated to listening to these usually are the ones who are doing the same things, right? Freedom of speech was not designed so we could silence things we don't like. It was to protect those who would speak things that we don't necessarily like, and allow that minority voice to have a platform to speak, just like the hateful, God-hating feminists are allowed to have a platform to spout all their hatred as they please, and then turn around hypocritically and call everybody else hate speech. The term hate speech, again, it's a media tactic used to intimidate those who would speak the truth. It doesn't exist to protect those whose personal feelings have been hurt, okay? And there's stuff I have read. There was a thing that came out of Harvard, okay, where there was a woman who claimed that anything that would upset someone's personal feelings she actually suggested this in a paper that she wrote for the school. I forget what it was that she was writing it for. It was some official paper she did, long out research paper, that anything that would be disruptive, or she's giving all these vague terms like that would be make people not feel uncomfortable, things like that. These are things that should be rejected out of the school. From Harvard, okay, who claims to be like, oh, we bring in all these people, we're the highest levels of knowledge and blah 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 that they claim, even though Harvard's a wicked place too. But the fact of the matter is that this is coming out of there, where she suggested that they should silence all those things, that all of it should be screened, and if any of it is making someone feel uncomfortable or bad, it should be actually eliminated and prevented from anybody seeing. This is coming from feminists. They are working their best to destroy all free speech in this country by screaming and crying and whining and crying and whining and crying and screaming some more. That's exactly how, it's through the whining and crying. That's how communism is going to get formed in our country, is through things like feminism, okay? And I'll demonstrate that more as we go through this. But things like just quoting scripture will offend a lot of people. Well, what do you think one of the first things they get rid of free speech? What is one of the first things that's going to be tossed out? The King James Bible. That'll be one of the first things tossed out. You won't even be able to quote it in certain places. We'll have to do it in secret, in private, as they have to do in some other countries who have a lot of persecution. And in places like Canada, it's already been ruled by their government that things like scripture and facts are hate speech. There was a newspaper, and I have all this documented on, again, you want references for all this stuff, it's all documented on the website. Go there and check it out. There's a newspaper ad somebody put out, probably one of the Christians put out. It contained scripture references to verses that had condemned homosexuality as a sin, and a Canadian government agency declared it to be hate speech because it offended a few queers that saw it. Oh no, that made us feel uncomfortable. Government, make these bad people go away. That's what they do. And I say it that way because they are acting like they're 5. No, that's not true. That's an insult to 5-year-olds. They're acting like they're 3. Okay? And that's ridiculous. There's going to come a time in the U.S. where I will not be able to talk like this anymore. And all these feminists out there saying hate speech over and over and over and over, and whining about and demanding all these things done about it, they're one day going to destroy all free speech. Well then, okay, now we're going to have equal rights, won't we? Yeah, we will have perfectly equal rights because feminists will make sure that no one has any at all. The very platform they're speaking on, they are hacking away at with axes. They're going to realize they're destroying their own platform. Now, there are many YouTube videos out there that have been posted of feminists working their absolute hardest to interrupt meetings and forums that are developed for men. Okay? Because, like I said, because of these issues that are coming up, because of the feminists, men's groups are starting to get together and talk about these things. And what they'll do is they'll shout into megaphones to interrupt the meeting so nobody can hear anything, and they'll pull fire alarms. Pulling a fire alarm is not a joke. Okay, you realize that if you pull a fire alarm and there is no fire, and if somebody is injured or there's any property damage that's done by pulling that fire alarm, then it's considered a felony. You can get heavy fines and go to federal prison for pulling a fire alarm under false pretenses. Now, in the videos that I've seen on this issue, there are feminists that have gone in and pulled a fire alarm in a college building. All it was some men got into an auditorium. They scheduled it. You have to go sign up for it, and they scheduled it. And they're feminists standing outside in the hallway, yelling and screaming into megaphones where they can't hardly hear anything that's going on. And one of them decides to pull a fire alarm, and all the feminists start cheering. They're breaking the law. They're endangering people, and they're just cheering over it. Talk about foolish. Unbelievable. So, Proverbs chapter 6, starting from verse 16 to 18, it says, "These 6 things doth the Lord hate, yea, 7 are an abomination unto him. One of those says, a heart that deviseth wicked imaginations, feet that be swift in running to mischief." And that's exactly what these feminists are doing. And God hates it. So there's a video I have on here. I'm not going to play this video. I can't. I'd like to, but there is way too much profanity for me to justify playing this. So if you want to, you can go onto the website, you can watch it yourself, okay? But this is a University of Toronto, and this one has actually gotten a lot of eyeball traffic because of what feminists did at this thing. They blocked off a building for a forum meeting led by a guy named Warren Farrell. Now, Warren Farrell, when I saw this at first, I had no idea who the guy was. I checked him out later. He is a very calm, very level-headed, very soft-spoken older man. That, I mean, you'd see him, and he's one of the most gentle people you would ever, incredibly gentle in the way he handles everything. Now, I listened to some of what he's done. He has some very big philosophical problems, partially because I think he's an evolutionist on top of it. But he's incredibly soft-spoken. The guy, when you listen to him and you look at him, you're like, this guy wouldn't harm a fly. But these women just got in front of this building, arm in arm, along with a few other men who are, feminist supporters. There's very few there, but they're all a bunch of goths and weird people like this. Just, I don't know how to describe it, but if you watch the video yourself, they all get in front of this building to block men from entering the building. Well, you see, they're not allowed to do that. See, this is private property, and you're breaking school rules by doing this, which means what security needed to do was push these people off. But they had to call in police agency, Toronto police, had to come in there, and they had to eventually, after probably about an hour, get a bunch of the police officers together and push these women off of there. These women were not only blocking this, don't think this is some peaceful protest. They are yelling and screaming at all these men who simply want to go in and listen to what Warren Farrell had to say. They are calling them pigs and rapists and every name that you can think of. Watch it for yourself, and you'll see. They're calling the police officers and security a bunch of pigs and rapists. They're calling them rapists for what? One of the guys that wanted to get in there, and you can watch the video, he's on there, he simply wanted to get in, and because these feminists, okay, what they did is they interviewed the feminists, and they said, if these men want to have discussions, there are feminist meetings they can go to have these discussions. Really? How comfortable do you think, like, for example, if you women out there, okay, if you wanted to have a meeting to get together to have a girls' meeting to discuss some issues on some things, and there was a bunch of guys that were running at you guys and yelling at you and getting in your faces and calling you all these things, all these names, and saying that you're, I'm not going to start calling all the names, but you can think of a bunch of really nasty things they could call you, would you? And they say, you need to join our groups. You guys wouldn't join their groups either. I mean, why is it these feminists think that any of these men would be interested in joining their groups after seeing all this? These girls were following this one guy who was interviewed, calling him a rapist and everything like that. And so the guy holding the camera says, why did you want to come to this meeting with Warren Farrell today? He says, well, recently I had 2 of my friends commit suicide, both of them back to back within a few weeks of each other. And I just wanted to get in and discuss the reasons why this was happening, why they did this. That's it. He wanted to go in to discuss the issues of why 2 of his closest friends had committed suicide. And these women were calling him a rapist and a pig and everything else. Welcome to feminism. Here it is. Watch the video, you'll see it for yourself. I would encourage you to watch it at least once. You probably don't want to watch it around your children because there's a lot of profanity in it. But I encourage you to watch it once to see what it's really like. See what's really going on. Now, isn't it interesting that these women are given open platforms to speak on these college campuses, but men are not? Why are they trying to prevent men from having a platform to speak on as well? I mean, but here's what's really interesting. Even though these college men are not allowed to have an open platform to speak, feminists continue calling them privileged. How are they privileged when they're not allowed to have the platform to speak that feminists are? Well, that's because we're going to talk about the illusion of male privilege. Now, this is something that a phrase that's been used many times, male privilege, male patriarchy, all these things, it's an illusion. And it's been created by feminists. Feminists claim that men are a part of a patriarchy, which is supposed to be a society designed by men and for men, to protect men and give men all benefits at the expense of women, who feminists claim that women do nothing but suffer for the sake of men. Right? That's the general idea. That is the general thing that's taught in music, in the lyrics of music, in movies, in TV shows, in mainstream media, for the most part. Everywhere this is taught over and over and over. You get it from your school. You'll get it from your church. Yes, you will get it from church buildings as well, because they are plagued with this feminist philosophy just the same as everybody else. And we'll see more of that as we go through. But the word privilege defined means a right, immunity, or benefit enjoyed only by a person beyond the advantages of most. So that means that one person has a right or immunity or benefit that is above everyone else in a group or something like that. They get special privileges. That's what that means, right? So a privileged person gets other people to lift and carry their burdens for them. I repeat, listen carefully. A privileged person gets somebody else to lift and carry their burdens for them. So, the argument feminists make for male privilege is that men don't have to carry any of their burdens. They just pass their burdens on to women, and women must suffer the responsibilities of all his duties. So, I addressed this by making a demotivational poster, which again you can view on the website. in which I split into half. The top half shows a bunch of women. This is back during the era of World War One, I believe. Was it one or two? No, it was World War One. Excuse me. Where there's a bunch of women who are holding up their picket signs and marching down the street, you know, in their nice outfits and everything like that. Okay, and they're like women's suffrage. That's what they're doing. The bottom half is showing a dead soldier that was trying to cling to life to try to get through a bunch of barbed wire, and he was shot to death. So I ask, which of these two groups has more privilege? Is it the men or the women? See, now the reason these women had the privilege to march down streets with their signs is because their male counterparts were in a foreign country taking bullets and bleeding out on a battlefield. Now, others of them made it home, but as with every war, many of them have lifelong physical injuries and mental damage that women, at least at that time, never had to see. Now, where were the women at that time with the picket signs that read, "Give women the right to suffer and die on the battlefield"? Where was that? The fact is that women have always had the right to suffer and die on the battlefield if she really wanted to. But not only do women not have the physical and mental capability to perform at the same level as a man on the battlefield, and ladies, you do not. Period. And as we're going to see later when I get, probably not in this part, but in the next part we're going to get into, I will show you testimonies from active and retired military personnel, both men and women, who will agree with me. They do not have the physical or mental capability to perform at the same level as a man on the battlefield. And men afforded women the privilege to stay home with their families. Now, don't sit there and think that men, the reason men go off to war is because they like it. I pray to God that none of you say that. I mean, yes, there might be a few crazy guys out there that just really want to get and jump into combat. Yeah, there's people like that. And that's something if they want to live by the sword, guess what they're going to die by, okay? There's some people out there that are like that. But in general, for the most part, and please stop making this, because people do that all the time. I talk about in general for the most part, and people say, yeah, but I know this one person who's like this. Great, you know one person. I'm looking at the the bigger picture here, okay? In general, neither men nor women want to go to the battlefield. Nobody wants to. Nobody wants to leave their family. Nobody wants to leave their home to go out and suffer and die on a battlefield. But however, if someone has to go, men don't want women to suffer the heat, to suffer the cold, the sweat, the strain, the stress, the bloodshed, the destruction, and death, and many other things that they have to go through. Men pick up to face these things so that their wives, daughters, mothers, sisters, and sweethearts won't have to. Again, what was the privilege there? The privilege is a person who gets other people to lift and carry their burdens for them. Right? So who's privileged? Is it men or women? You tell me. I mean, male privilege would be special, if it existed, it would be special benefits and advantages that are given to men that they receive over women. So we're going to go through some statistics and facts and find out how much male privilege there really is in the United States today. Now, according to the Washington Post, since the 1980s, more female voters have showed up to the polls than male voters. That's a very interesting fact here. From the Washington Post, in an article they have called "Why Women Are Far More Likely to Vote Than Men," it says, quote, "In 2012, the difference in turnout was nearly 4 percentage points. 63.7% of ladies voted versus 59.8% of gents. The disparity was more than twice as large if you look just at those who have never been married," end quote. Okay, so what they were looking at was just men and women in general. But if you simply isolate that to single women versus single men, more women, far more women, are going to the voting booths than men. So for almost 40 years, women have been the majority voters in the U.S. So how could it possibly be after 40 years that we're still in a male privilege and patriarchal society when women have been the majority voters? All these feminists out there claiming, Trump's not my president, I didn't vote for him. Do you realize the majority of women voted for him? Oh, well, think about that for a moment. So if anyone's to be blamed for a patriarchy, the blame doesn't fall to men, it falls to women. Because women are voting for, in electing officials who would oppress women if that were true. But that's not the case, as we're going to see. USA Today gave average statistics pulled from the CDC studies in which they found that there is a 4.8-year difference between the life expectancy of men compared to women. So to recap that means there's almost a 5-year difference between the average life expectancy of men and the average life expectancy of women. Okay, and the life expectancy is when, on average, they say the average age of death. So women in the United States have a life expectancy of 81.2 years. And men have a life expectancy of 76.4 years. So women, it's a little over 81. Men, it's a little over 76. And that's as of 2014. But this really creates an interesting problem when we stop and consider Social Security. Now, Social Security is money that government forcibly takes out of the average American citizen's paycheck. It's totally unconstitutional, totally unbiblical. I'm against it. I think people ought to be responsible for their own retirements, but it's supposed to be setting back this money for their retirement, right? And that way they can get Social Security benefits. That's what that's called. Completely backwards. It's totally communist type system that needs to go out the window, right? However, it exists, so let's talk about it. Now, I put a chart on here, and I spent a lot of time making these charts for this book, so I hope that you guys will check them out and at least take some time to study them and look at the facts about it. But for every single chart that I've made on here, I have given the references where you can find all this information. I gave the USA Today references as well as the Social Security Administration references and all that stuff that you can go look up on the government websites and find all these numbers for yourself. And I do this with everything. So I may not tell you exactly, I may not mention all the references and every time I give it, but on the website, if you go and look, all the references are there where you can go look up and you can read these studies for yourself. You can look up these numbers for yourself and double check me. Prove I'm wrong when I show this stuff, okay? Now, on the chart on the website, I have like green bars that show when Social Security starts. Social Security benefits start at age 62. So on average, what that means is that men, on average, only get 14.4 years of Social Security benefits before on average they die, whereas women get on average 19.2 years of Social Security benefits before on average they die. So women are getting 5 more years worth of Social Security benefits than men are. Why is it that we have a system right now where women are getting more benefits out of Social Security than men? Well, obviously because of male privilege. Now the problem gets far worse because men actually pay more Social Security than women do, because men, on average, work longer and more hours overall than women. And we're going to cover more on that later. We're not going to get to that anytime soon, but when we get to the illusion of the wage gap, because if you ever heard there's a wage gap between men and women, that is not true at all. If there is a wage gap, it actually benefits women. And we will cover more on that later. So you want to stay tuned. This is going to be many parts later. We're going to get to that. But keep staying tuned to these teachings, and you'll get the information on that. Or you can go read the book now on the website if you want to, and find out for yourself. Because I got a whole chapter on that one. Anyway, so we'll cover more on that later. But according to the National Academy of Social Insurance, women make up 56% of the beneficiaries of Social Security. That means men only make up 44%. See, women rely heavily on Social Security today because they often outlive their husbands. And so we have a situation in which women are paying less into the system, but receiving more out of it. And there's no efforts by the so-called male patriarchy to fix these numbers to take away the benefits of women and make them equal with men. Because why is it today that we have a society in which men are getting less of the benefits of Social Security than women? Because male privilege, obviously. The Social Security Administration's 2014 analysis talked about how there's men and women who get retirement benefits, and I published one of the charts that they had when they released this. I actually got a screenshot of it so you can see for yourself that more men, as about 80%, received retired worker benefits than did women, 63%. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means they paid into the system and got their retirement. So 80% of men did, but only 63% of women did. So men are paying more into the system. So how do women end up getting the benefits from Social Security? More women than men. And when the men are paying more into it, how is this happening? It's because the women get to file under other circumstances, namely being a widow or a parent, or being the spouse of a retired or disabled worker. These are ways that they get to file for Social Security benefits. And the Social Security Administration Office points out this fact in their document, which is called Facts and Figures about Social Security 2014. It says, quote, less than 0.5% of men received benefits as survivors, that's widowers or fathers, or as spouses of retired and disabled workers, end quote. So what does that mean? Okay, here's the bottom line. Women get benefits as widows, 14%. Well, how many men get it? 0.5. Women get benefits as spouses of retirees. So your spouse had retired, and you get benefits from that. 8%. How many men got that? 0.5. That means women are receiving the majority of the benefits while paying for the minority of the benefits. Why is this happening right now? Obviously because of male privilege. If we did live in a patriarchal society, I mean, how dumb could men possibly be? To live in a patriarchal society that's designed by men for the benefits of men, why are we not passing laws that make women pay more into it and men get all the benefits? Interesting question. Now, of course, I'm against the concept of tax-funded, government-controlled Medicare and Medicaid for many reasons. Again, it's unconstitutional and unbiblical, and I'm not going to discuss it right now. But the United States has it, so let's take a look at this, okay? Now, remember that we've already established that women live, on average, about 5 years longer than men. So that should automatically conclude that women spend more in Medicare and Medicaid than men do. Now, this is from the National Women's Law Center, which would support all the feminist junk, okay? They may not say that directly, but they would. But they said, quote, women constitute more than half of the individuals with Medicare, because women on average are poorer, live longer, and have more health care needs than men. Medicare, sometimes combined with Medicaid, potentially plays a greater role for them in preventing illness and destitution. Now, you'll notice, if you ever go look up this article from the National Women's Law Center, they never mention that the government is not an orchard of money trees. Now, I realize the Federal Reserve System treats it like that, but it's not a system of money trees to where money's just coming out of nowhere. There are taxes that go to the government. Well, who do the taxes come from? The people. And who's paying most of the taxes? Men. So who is paying the most for the Medicare and Medicaid for women? Men are paying it. The article continues, and their articles, by the way, is called The Importance of Medicare for Women. It continues to say women made up 56% of individuals with Medicare in 2010. Women make up an even larger portion of the oldest Medicare beneficiaries. Women over 80 made up 62% of individuals with Medicare in 2010, end quote. Now, of course, that's because their average age of death is higher, but 62%, that means 2 out of 3 people getting Medicare over the age of 80 are women. But men spend more time in their life paying for it. This is obviously because of male privilege. Because it's a man's privilege to spend his life paying for all the things that he affords for women. But, if you actually go back and look at that article, there's absolutely no concern in there whatsoever for men. None. They don't even talk about the issue. They just encourage, they say, well, we really, really need this for women, so government, make sure you're giving it to us, because they look to the government. It's always the government. But you realize the government is the male figure in the whole system, right? I mean, you got the women whining, we want more, we want more, we want more, and they're whining to a male, I mean, because they claim it's a male patriarchy, right? So what are they doing? They're whining to the male patriarchy, give us more. So what about the independent woman that doesn't need a man? But yet here she is, whining to the government, give us more stuff, right? I mean, the men are working longer work hours during their life and pay more into the Medicare system than women do, and they get less out of it. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services give us even more details than that. And this is a study that they did called the U.S. Personal Healthcare Spending by Age and Gender, which says, quote, per capita spending for working-age adult females in 2012, which was $7,430, was 28% higher than male per capita spending, which was only $5,822. Females between ages 19 to 44 spend 66% more per capita in 2012 than did males in the same age group. The significant difference in spending is largely associated with the costs for maternity care, and females spending over 46% more than males on retail prescription drugs, end quote. Now, I'm not going to go into the fallacies of getting on the drugs, the retail prescription drugs, either. I think people should get off those, but that's a whole other issue. However, the fact is that through this, the amount of money that women spend is far greater than men for Medicare. They spend more for Medicare, they get more benefits out of Medicare, they get to file for more benefits out of retirement things, and men end up working longer hours and spending more and paying more into the retirements, into the Medicare, into the Medicaid, and women are getting far, far more out of it. And the more statistics you look at, the worse this gets. Now, as a side note, part of the reason for this is that there's also a difference of philosophy between men and women and how they operate, okay? Boys, and now I'm not saying this is the case in every single case. Again, don't jump on me for, well, I know this one isolated case over here. I get it, okay? I'm saying in general, boys are taught to be tougher than girls. See, when a girl gets injured, she's immediately given large amounts of help, rest, and care. Everybody, and just think about this for a moment. If you're in a subway station or a bus station or something like that, and a lady slips on maybe one of her high heels and she falls, look who comes to her aid. A bunch of people. Oh, are you okay? Okay, is everybody? Everybody stops and looks. If a guy falls, people don't come to his aid. In fact, half of them laugh. Don't they? That's exactly what they do. Because, I mean, why is it that women are everybody jumps to their aid, but men are basically laughed at for having the same, just for having a fall, having the same injury? Why? Well, obviously because male privilege. See, when a boy, when he's younger and he gets injured, everybody doesn't come rush to his aid. You know what he's typically told to do? Walk it off. As if walking has some sort of secret healing power that none of us are aware of. But you see, among men, seeking aid is typically a sign of weakness, and we're taught to be tougher. Now, I'm not saying we need to take that away. I'm saying what we need is for women to understand the corruption of the feminist philosophy. Because none of this that I've quoted to you and I've talked about so far is showing anything of male privilege. It's actually showing that men have it tougher than women do. And there was even there was some, I didn't document any of this on here, but there was some woman who decided to dress up as a man. She, I guess, had some manly features, and she had professional makeup artists come help her and everything, and she actually was able to dress and pose herself as a man, and she tried to enter male society. And she did this for about a year. I can't remember if it was a year or 2 years. She kept doing this. She tried to, get a job and work as a man. She tried to join, men's bowling leagues and things like that. And when she came out, here's what happened. First of all, she had to go through a lot of, I guess, psychological therapy because she got into a depression. She almost killed herself. when she came out of all that, she said, I was so happy to come back and be a woman again, because she did not want to live in the man's world. She said it was a whole lot harder to do. And then when she joined the men's groups, like one of the things she got involved with, there was a group of guys that were construction workers. They were just local in the city that they were there, she was living in. She got into one of their bowling leagues, and she expected to, hear what you see in the movies, that all these guys, they just sit around talking about breasts all day. Trust me, I have been in a lot of groups of men. We do not sit around talking about breasts all day. If that subject even comes up, we mention it, we laugh at something, and we move on. And people, these women sit there, there's so many, not women, but feminists in general, sit there and think that, this is what guys sit around and do all the time. We have more important things to do, and more important things to talk about, okay? Anyway, the bottom line is that she expected all that. When she got in there, she said these guys were incredibly accepting. And she says, I was terrible at bowling. She couldn't even barely bowl 100. She was just horrible at it. And they encouraged her and laughed with her because they thought she was one of the guys. And so they did that. And then she said when they would talk about their wives, they talked incredibly reverently about their wives. They weren't bad-mouthing or anything like that. And typically, she said it was a hard time for a lot of them to talk about, because she was able to get more intimate conversation with them, and she found that there was problems that they were having, but they had a hard time expressing those between them because, again, they're taught to be tough and that kind of thing. And so basically she fell into depression. She said she couldn't wait to get out and start living as a woman again, because she didn't want to have to actually go through what it takes to live as a man has to live. And so I think there's a lot of women that expect, well, men don't understand what we have to go through. Are you kidding? Yeah. It's the women that don't understand what the men have to go through, because the privileged person in the relationship typically does not understand what the unprivileged person has to go through. It's not the other way around. Okay? The servant to, like, some rich person, the servant understands exactly how the rich master, how he lives, because he's the privileged one. He understands everything about his life. He's intimate with him. But it's the unprivileged one. You see, the master of the house typically does not always know what the unprivileged person has to go through, which is the servant. Okay? So I'm sitting there saying that everything about feminism is backwards from reality. And I'll give you an example of the tougher things. When I was running track and field during practice one day when I was in high school, okay, I was 14, I fell and slammed right down onto the pavement. I mean, I tore up I slid while I was doing it, so I tore up my arms and my chin to the point that I had like blood running down my shirt and all that. And I had to have stitches that afternoon. Now, if a girl had fallen and that happened to her, there would have been every guy in the field come to her aid immediately to carry her off and made sure she had everything afforded to her. But I'm a male, so what happened? I did have one girl walk over, and while my head was ringing and blood was running down me, she walks up, and this was a girl that she got a near perfect score on her SATs, I found later. But she walked up to me and she goes, "Are you okay?" Oh, for someone so intelligent to ask a dumb question. Thank you. Yes, I'm fine. I'm bleeding to death, but I'm fine. So anyway, but I had all this, and I walked myself towards the school, and I kept having to like take 3 steps and then kneel down because I was getting dizzy, and then I would get back up, take 3 steps, kneel down. I'm not getting any help. I finally sat down when I got to the school building. I sat down on the sidewalk because the loss of blood, I was just getting too dizzy. And finally somebody came over and said, "Let's get you inside and get you cleaned up, because after all, I'm a guy, I can take it," right? But that's what expected of males. I'm not saying that needs to be taken away. I'm not saying we need to pamper little boys. Don't misunderstand. I think men ought to be tough. But I think women need to understand what men have to go through. So let's continue here with some more statistics. And the Social Security Administration statistics from 2010 has a wide variety of taxes on them, okay? Because they tax for this type of Social Security and that type of Social Security. You know, there's one called OASDI, which is Old Age Survivor and Disability Insurance, okay? Now, the report that they gave, and by the way, I'll mention this, if you actually go look at the whole report, I looked at tax after tax after tax after tax after tax, all the way down through, and every single one of them, men paid more into the system and women got more out of it. Every single time. I didn't see, now maybe there is some examples in there that wasn't the case, but I didn't see them. So for this OASDI, men are paying 59.3%, so almost 60% of the Social Security taxes for it, while women are only paying a little over 40%. And as we saw earlier, the statistics are showing that men are only getting about 44% of that money, while women are getting 56%. I mean, that's huge. Women are paying far less but getting far more out of it. The same document showed that men, this is a Medicare, it's called Part A-HI, it's showing that men are paying 62.7% of that Medicare, while women are only paying barely 37%. Just a little over 37% of it. And again, women are getting 56% of the benefits, while men are only getting 44%. I mean, why is it that men are having to pay so much into it and women getting so much more out of it? Obviously because of male privilege. So, I mean, again, male patriarchy, why aren't they, jumping up and saying, man, look at all this money men are paying. We need to stop giving women so much. We need to give them less and give men more. Why aren't they doing that? I mean, wouldn't that be the logical thing that a male patriarchy would do if it's a society created by men and for men for the benefit of men? I mean, folks, I'm just getting started here. We're going to go through a ton of these things. And you should already be suspecting, something smells a little fishy with the feminist arguments here. Yeah, feminists don't like facts. There's a reason for it. Now, let's talk about the homeless. Among the homeless, the grand majority are men, not women. This is not because men love to be homeless. Sometimes you kind of feel like sometimes that attitude seems to be floating around, that men just love to be homeless. No, they don't. But rather, because more men are homeless because women are afforded more opportunities. And that is for a lot of reasons, okay? Typically, people take more pity on homeless women than they do homeless men. That is simply a fact. You can argue that till you're blue in the face, but if you, what I'm going to show you here is what's called the Annual Homeless Assessment Report. The Annual Homeless Assessment Report, I took a screenshot. When I saw the cover, I couldn't believe it. Because let me not get ahead of myself. I'll show you why. First of all, let me quote from their report. And this is from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Quote, most people experiencing homelessness are men. The sheltered population composed more women, 45%, than the unsheltered population, 29%. That's interesting. What does that mean? Well, a sheltered population is somebody who's homeless, but they're getting assistance. Like there's a homeless shelter where they can stay, right? Unsheltered people are they're just out on the street, and they have nothing. Now, men make up, according to these 2015 stats, there were 339,000 men homeless, and only 224,000 females homeless, okay? So, male versus female. The sheltered population, though, mostly consisted, the huge majority, like, for example, men who were getting shelter is 216,000, where women are 174,000. Now, that's less, women are still less there, but the numbers are much closer together. Do you see how the numbers are much closer together? Now watch this. The unsheltered who are not getting assistance, men, 123,000, women, 50,000. The numbers are much further apart. That means a much higher ratio, much higher percentage of women are getting assistance than men. Now you need to think about that for a minute and what that means. Even though women make up a much smaller portion of homeless people, far less women receive an unsheltered status, meaning they have far more opportunities to get help than men do. Why is that? Obviously because of male privilege. The same report found that of 47,700 homeless veterans they recorded, over 90% were men. The homeless veteran situation is extremely sad. In fact, the veteran situation at all is really extremely sad. We're going to see we're going to get more examples of that later. But more men are in the military than women. That is true. We can take that into consideration. But homelessness is still an issue that's plaguing men far more than women in the U.S. Whether or not, it's because more men are in the military. Well, that's irrelevant. It's still plaguing men. And there's part of the reasons for that. We're also going to get into some of the child support issues. We will get into that later as well. I'm not going to cover that right now, but we just want to keep that in mind when we're talking about this issue. And we'll see why some of these men have become homeless. But it's still plaguing men, okay? And what's amazing is that feminists constantly claim that it is the white male privilege that's the problem, right? It's the white male. People like me, I'm the privileged one. It's amazing growing up. I always wondered where my white male privilege card was going to come in. It's going to come in the mail, and I'm going to get my special card, and I can walk into a business. I said, hey, I'm a white male. I get a job here, right? And they say, come on in. I want to know where my special benefits were, because I've been told that my entire life through all the media, through family, through friends, or not through friends, but from family, from church, from my school, from TV, everywhere. Everybody's telling me. Even on the radio, everyone's telling me that I have this privilege, and I've always spent my life wondering where it was. Where's my male privilege card that I get where I get all these special benefits? Because I've struggled a lot just to make ends meet. But everywhere around me, in all sorts of jobs and positions I saw women getting promoted, I saw women getting paid more, but I was told that I was the one that was getting all the benefits. And I never saw it. But I couldn't put it to words because I couldn't consciously even acknowledge what I was seeing was different from what I was being told, and I wonder why I kept getting frustrated all the time. It's because I was getting lied to. So these feminists say it's the white male privilege, right? But the 2015 report stated that most homeless people, 49% of them are white. The majority of the unsheltered population who are getting, that means that's someone who's getting no help, 57% of them white. Which means it is the white male that is suffering most right now in the U.S. in terms of homelessness. So how can you sit back and say they're the most privileged? If they were the most privileged, those statistics would be the smallest. But it's other ethnic groups, it's the opposite sex and other ethnic groups that are getting all the help. It's the white males typically that have to pay the most into the society, and it's everybody else that's getting the most benefits. But yet we're told that we are the most privileged. I don't understand that. Now, if you want to say that, okay, it's the homeless woman that pulls at the heartstrings of people. Homeless men almost never do. Well, the proof of that should be the cover of this report. The annual homeless assessment report from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. When they publish this, the majority of the people that are published on the front cover, because they have pictures of all these people, are women. Yet, their report said that most people experiencing homelessness are men. Why would they do this? Because male privilege, right? Well, we got to solve this problem with homelessness of men, so let's advertise homeless women so people will be moved to do something about it. And these women say that they don't have any privilege. Are you kidding me? The American female is the most privileged being that has ever walked the face of this planet. And I'm telling you, the media has lied and lied and lied to us. I think that's a good stopping point, and next week what we're going to do, we're going to talk about homicides and how men are most affected by that. We are going to get into the military issue and talk about a lot of issues like that, a lot of deception that's going on there, and how women for the most part, should not be a part of the military, and in many of these different instances. I'm not saying that they can't be part of it in different aspects of it, but there's a number of it where women are being afforded every opportunity that men have to go through standard training. Women don't have to do the same things men have to do. Again, that's called female privilege, not male privilege, okay? And we're going to talk about suicide cases. There's a whole lot more that we're going to talk about here coming up that's going to get even more interesting as we go. So please stay tuned with us for part 3. Did anybody have any questions or comments about any of this before we close?
You know, you just mentioned the military, and I was thinking when you were talking about life expectancy, what part military and combat deaths had to do with the life expectancy of males.
I don't know if they took that into consideration or not. I don't know if they did just a general average or if they only targeted, like non-military members or something like that, just to get a general life expectancy based on, because it was, I'm not sure if that one specifically was CDC, but that if it was CDC, they may have not targeted military members, because what they want to do is get a generalized health of a standard living without any sudden death involved in there, right? And so they were looking for health reasons about that, so they may not have included, I'm not sure. So that's something to look at the report more closely if you want to find out. Anybody have any other questions or comments before we close? All right, well, thanks for joining us, everybody, this week, and may our Lord Jesus Christ bless and protect you all as you seek to study His Word and glorify Him in all that you say and do, and God willing, we will see you next week.